Darnell Carter stood outside the conference room, just feet from the men who thought he belonged behind a mop. He hadn't mopped a floor in 15 years, not since grinding his way up from janitor to executive hopeful. But old titles die hard, especially when you're black in corporate America. Through the door, laughter, then a voice, smug and sharp. "You're lucky to mop floors here." It wasn't meant for him, but it was. Darnell didn't flinch. He let the words burn. They weren't new, just louder this time. 1,000 microaggressions clanged in his chest like chains. The stolen ideas, the backhanded praise, the promises never kept. Then, slowly, he opened his leather portfolio. Not for a resume, not for a resignation, but for a letter, sealed by the United States government, signed by the president. He stepped inside. Faces turned. Silence hit. He placed the letter on the table like a detonator. What it contained would upend everything. But would it finally be enough? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Before Darnell Carter learned to keep his face still while his soul burned, he was just a boy with a sketch pad and a second-hand dream in a city that rarely gave either much room to grow. Detroit in the early 2000s wasn't the hollowed-out shell cable news loved to show. It had heartbeat, bass lines, barbershop wisdom, cookout sermons, and in a tiny red brick house on the east side, a young Darnell traced building silhouettes onto crumpled paper while his mother, Gloria, hummed gospel beside a boiling pot of collard greens. The world outside might have called their neighborhood underserved, but inside their home, there was no poverty of pride. "Say it again," Gloria would prompt every morning before school, handing Darnell his lunch and kissing his forehead. "I'm going to build something they can't tear down," he'd reply, chest puffed with all the belief a child could carry. His father, Mason, didn't believe in fairy tales. He believed in foundations, in poured concrete and late-night shifts at the auto plant. "You work, you rise," Mason told him one night while patching drywall by flashlight. "But never wait for them to lift you. They don't see us like that." Still, they taught him to dream. They just also taught him to armor up for it. At 10, Darnell watched the skyline from his rooftop and imagined one with his name on it. At 12, he read business magazines at the public library, while other kids played NBA Street. At 13, he mapped out a company that would create jobs, rebuild neighborhoods, and make sure no kid ever had to choose between the light bill and dinner. And then came career day. He'd pressed his shirt 3 times, worn Mason's best tie, nodded twice. His classmates whispered in awe as he took the mic. "I want to run a company that rebuilds cities," he said, "with jobs for everyone, and no trash on the street, where the lights never go out." Some clapped. Mr. Langley didn't. He was a visiting exec from a downtown firm, all silver watch and clipped vowels. "That's ambitious," he said, smiling the way people do when they don't believe you. "But maybe think about something more grounded, like facilities work. That's respectable too." The air left the room. Darnell's hands curled behind his back. Later in the hallway, Mr. Langley leaned in close. His voice was soft. "Final. You'll never be more than a good kid from Detroit. Stay in your lane." It wasn't loud enough for witnesses, just loud enough to stain. That night, Darnell didn't eat dinner. He didn't tell his parents. He sat at his desk, pulled out his sketch pad, and wrote the words again. "I'm going to build something they can't tear down." But this time, underneath, he added, "Langley will work for me one day." That moment didn't break him. It rerouted him. From that day on, he stopped waiting for applause. Teachers praised his grit. Counselors marveled at his composure. But no one saw the steel he was quietly forging beneath their assumptions. At Renaissance High, he became a star, not the kind who danced or dunked, but the kind who made teachers forget their own rubrics. Debate champion, robotics finalist, dual enrollment college credit before junior year. He led, but never gloated, dominated, but never bragged. He learned the code: smile without showing your teeth, never show them they've hurt you, document everything, outperform expectations until the bar snaps. In the counselor's office during senior year, a white advisor, kind, well-meaning, but completely unaware, glanced over his Harvard application and said, "Wow, this is impressive. Did you do all this on your own?" Darnell blinked, then smiled. "No ma'am, just me and the doubt." Morehouse welcomed him like royalty. But even among black excellence, Darnell felt the echoes of Langley. Every missed scholarship, every internship rejection that ended in "we went another direction." The unspoken knowledge that while some of his classmates would be recruited for their potential, he'd have to prove his value every step of the way, and then prove it again the next morning. Still, he pushed forward. It was at Morehouse he learned how the world moves, not just in ideas, but in alliances. He sharpened his language, polished his presence, and watched how corporate recruiters scanned rooms with the same unconscious bias Langley once wore like a tailored suit. By 25, he had 3 degrees, 2 startup offers, and a LinkedIn page more impressive than some junior VPs. But the voice remained. Not loud, just steady. You'll never be more than a good kid from Detroit. And every time someone called him impressive, with a note of surprise, every time he was asked where he was really from, every time a pitch was praised in private but dismissed in public, the voice grew bolder. He worked harder, smiled tighter, documented more, until the day he no longer needed to. Because one morning, years later, the same boy Langley tried to belittle walked into a government office as part of a national anti-racism business initiative. What began as a pilot mentorship pitch turned into a citywide proposal, and the President's Economic Council noticed. 2 months later, a letter arrived, official, heavy, signed by a hand that commanded headlines. But Darnell didn't frame it. He filed it. And when the time came, when another man with another smug laugh said the words, "You're lucky to mop floors here," Darnell reached into his portfolio and pulled out the past, rewritten in ink and authority. That voice in his head had followed him for decades, but now for the first time, Darnell Carter had something to silence it. The question was, would the world finally listen? The thing about ladders is, they're made to hold weight, but not too much of it, especially when the one climbing doesn't look like he's supposed to be there. Darnell Carter climbed anyway. His scholarship to Morehouse opened the door. His internship with Colburn Strategies cracked it wider, and when he graduated top of his class again, it was a Fortune 100 firm that came knocking. "We're excited to have someone with your grit," the recruiter had said on the call, as if Darnell's resume had been written in sweat instead of strategy. Grit? They loved that word. Grit made them feel good about hiring a black man. It suggested hardship, survival, maybe even charity. It let them pat themselves on the back while ignoring the excellence in front of them. Grit let them treat Darnell like an exception instead of the inevitable. His first job was in analytics, entry-level, mostly number crunching. But Darnell turned reports into insights, and insights into action. Within 6 months, one of his projections saved the company $1.2 million in regional losses. The regional manager took credit in the meeting. Darnell didn't flinch. He was promoted. But with every new floor he reached, the air got thinner. His second year, he pitched a marketing automation plan that would streamline client conversion. The team lead said, "Bold idea, especially from someone just a couple years out of school." The room chuckled lightly. He nodded, smiled. When the same strategy was floated 6 months later by a white manager and called visionary, Darnell took notes and kept receipts. He started saving the rejection emails. Not because he needed reminders, but because the patterns were too perfect. "We've gone in another direction. We appreciate your input, but at this time we feel your proposal doesn't align with our brand." He never replied. Not once. But he cataloged every single one, like puzzle pieces. He knew one day they might matter. Despite it all, the promotions came slow but steady. He was too good to ignore, too polished to dismiss, but never quite ready for the next leap. The feedback was always vague. "Just sharpen your executive presence. Be more assertive in meetings. Try to read the room." And still the compliments came. "You're a great listener. You bring such a calm energy. You're incredibly articulate." Articulate. As if his clarity of speech was a magic trick. As if brilliance in a black body had to be filtered through surprise. Darnell learned to hide his reactions in plain sight. A half smile, a slight tilt of the head. He learned which words to avoid. Aggressive, emotional, passionate. He learned to present data like it was someone else's idea, so it wouldn't feel threatening. He learned that being right wasn't the same as being heard. Then came the diversity photo. It was his 3rd year. The company released a press piece about inclusive leadership. Darnell's picture was front and center. He hadn't been interviewed, hadn't been asked, just captured candidly in a hallway, and used to represent a narrative the firm had yet to earn. He said nothing, but something shifted. He stopped attending the happy hours where his presence was tokenized, stopped laughing at the jokes that didn't land, stopped apologizing before sharing ideas in meetings. If the ladder was going to bend under his weight, he was going to climb it anyway, one cracked rung at a time. By year 4, he was managing a small team. Most of them were older than him. One, a man named Craig, always called him boss with a smirk. At first, Darnell thought it was harmless. Then during a project delay, Craig emailed a senior manager copying Darnell with the subject line, "Is he ready for this role?" He forwarded it to HR. They told him to work it out internally. He did. By outperforming, over-delivering, and publicly crediting his team, even Craig. The project finished early, under budget, and earned Darnell his next promotion. But the higher he climbed, the more the walls whispered. At lunch, a senior VP joked, "We're going to have to rename the executive suite at this rate. Carter and Co." Everyone laughed. Darnell smiled, even as something in his stomach turned. 1 week later, a director referred to one of his data reports as street smart. Another, "You've really matured. You've come a long way from, where did you say you're from again?" Each time, Darnell filed it away. Not in anger, in strategy. He wasn't climbing blind. He'd learned how to play chess in a room full of checkers. Then, unexpectedly, a rare opening emerged on the executive rotation track, a seat in the strategic planning committee, the unofficial launchpad to upper leadership. Darnell's record was unmatched. He applied. Weeks passed, no word. Then came the email. Rejection. No reason given, just the usual phrasing. "We've gone with another candidate who better aligns with current objectives." He didn't need to ask who. It wasn't rage he felt. It was confirmation. Still, he said nothing. Until one Thursday morning, the director of HR stopped him in the hallway. "We had to make some tough calls," she said, eyes too sympathetic to be sincere. "But you're absolutely on our radar. Don't lose faith." Darnell didn't reply. He just looked at her, then at the framed diversity award on her office wall. That weekend, at home, Alex found him on the balcony, staring into the city lights. "You look like you're somewhere else," she said. He nodded. "I think I am." She sat beside him. "You've been quiet lately." "I keep wondering," he said softly, "how far you have to climb before they stop reminding you where you started." Alex was quiet. "Then maybe it's not about where you started. Maybe it's about making sure they remember who built the ladder." It landed, hard. The next week, the VP of Strategy announced her retirement. Another rare opening. Another fork in the path. And then something unexpected happened. Darnell received an invite, an actual invitation to present at the next executive meeting. His proposal on sustainability metrics had caught the eye of the board. They wanted to hear his thoughts. It was the moment he'd been quietly preparing for his entire life. He stayed up 3 nights in a row, perfecting the pitch. Rehearsed transitions, cross-checked numbers, made sure every slide told a story. The morning of the presentation, he wore his sharpest charcoal suit. No tie, deliberate, power and precision, a subtle declaration that he belonged without needing to imitate. As he waited outside the glass-walled boardroom, he caught his reflection. Calm, ready, but something in his chest thrummed. Not fear.
Recognition.
He wasn't just climbing anymore. He was arriving. And then the door opened. Inside sat the decision-makers, men and women whose casual biases shaped careers. And among them, the same executive who'd once praised another man for delivering a less refined version of Darnell's own strategy. He stepped in, clicked the remote, and began. Slide by slide, calm, controlled, crisp, until a voice from the back interrupted. It was the executive. "Ambitious proposal," he said, drawing out the word like it tasted foreign, "especially from someone like you." The air thinned. No one spoke. Darnell felt the blood rush behind his eyes. The pitch continued, but everything had changed. His words still flowed, but underneath, something cracked. Not loudly. Just enough. When the meeting ended, Darnell shook hands, but as he walked out, a single thought followed him like a shadow. If this is what arrival looks like, what does resistance really require? The final slide faded to black. Darnell Carter lowered the remote slowly, resisting the urge to exhale. The boardroom sat in its usual hush-plush chairs, polished mahogany, filtered air, and yet something in the silence screamed. It wasn't the numbers. His data was airtight, his projections conservative, his language refined, calculated, meticulously stripped of anything they might call emotional. Still, when the executive spoke, it wasn't about the work. "Ambitious proposal," said Richard Ellison, Senior Vice President of Global Strategy. His voice was level, his smile razor-thin, "especially from someone like you." Darnell's grip on the clicker tightened so slightly, it might have been imperceptible to anyone else. But inside it was seismic. The line had been delivered with surgical precision, calm, casual, and carved like a scalpel. "Someone like you." The words lingered in the air, untouched, unanswered. Nobody else at the table spoke. Nobody pushed back. Not the CFO, who nodded along to Darnell's projections just minutes before. Not the director of operations, who once called Darnell's reporting game-changing in an internal memo. Silence moved across the table like a slow poison. On the surface, it was just a comment, vague enough to deny, sharp enough to wound, but beneath it pulsed a centuries-old message. Be grateful you're here. Darnell didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply nodded, voice even. I believe in solutions that meet the scale of the problem. Polite, professional, lethal in its own way. The meeting continued, but the mood had shifted. The energy no longer orbited the proposal. It orbited the moment. Every follow-up question felt like performance. Every good job afterward felt like sugar sprinkled on salt. As the room emptied, Richard lingered behind, pretending to tidy papers. Darnell knew the tactic. Subtle dominance through manufactured chance. He paused, readying to walk away. You've got drive, Carter, Richard said without looking up. But just remember, ambition burns fast if it outpaces judgment. It wasn't a warning. It was a leash. Darnell forced a smile. Good thing I've never relied on luck. Richard looked up, eyebrow raised slightly. There it was again, the silent calculation trying to figure out if Darnell had just crossed a line. He hadn't, but he had sharpened the edge. Back at his desk, Darnell sat down slowly, as if every bone needed to recalibrate. He opened his laptop, pulled up his own pitch deck again, not to revise it, but to remind himself it happened, that it was real, that it deserved to be seen. He typed a note into his private journal file. Ellison, someone like you. Intent, dismissive. Context, presentation success. Impact, undermines legitimacy. Subtext, you do not belong. He'd been documenting these moments for years. Each one labeled, categorized, archived. Not for revenge, for clarity. Because gaslighting was real, and so was survival. Midway through logging it, his Slack pinged. From Tanya R. Subject, Rees or rate work today.
Message, that was fire. He didn't know where to put you.
Tanya was one of the few black women on the leadership track. Sharp, deliberate, and as coded as Darnell. She'd been in the room too, and she saw it. That alone was a kind of solidarity. He stared at the message, smiled, then closed his screen. That night, at home, Alex cooked, a quiet ritual that didn't need words. Something happened today, he finally said, over baked salmon and rice. In the meeting, Alex didn't look up immediately. Let me guess, Ellison? Darnell nodded.
What'd he say?
He hesitated, called it ambitious, then added, for someone like you. Alex exhaled hard through her nose. Jesus.
Yeah?
They ate in silence for a moment. The salmon was perfectly seasoned, but neither of them tasted it. Are you going to report it? She asked. To who? He said. HR would just call it open to interpretation. He didn't say anything technically wrong. Alex chewed for a second, then swallowed hard. Then what? I keep climbing. She looked at him. And when do you start pushing back? He didn't answer, because he wasn't sure. Every reaction was ammunition. Every silence, a calculation. The tightrope he walked wasn't just above failure. It was woven through perception, built on invisible glass that cracked under too much black confidence. The next day, Darnell got an email. From Richard Ellison. Subject, follow-up on presentation. Message, would love to grab coffee and talk more. There's potential here. If we sharpen the edges, let me know. It read like mentorship. But Darnell knew better. Sharpen the edges was corporate for make it smaller. Manage perception was code for don't scare them. And someone like you was still ringing in his head. Still, he replied. Appreciate the offer. I'll check my schedule.
Measured.
Cool. But inside, something was stirring.
Not rage.
Precision. That afternoon, Tanya bumped into him at the elevator. Careful, she whispered, eyes forward. He's testing your ceiling. What if I'm the floor beneath his? She raised an eyebrow, then smiled. Then you better not blink. The elevator doors opened, but neither stepped inside. They waited. Together. That night, Darnell drafted something he hadn't touched in months. A memo. A proposal too bold for the current climate. Too honest. But the question wasn't whether it was ready. It was whether he finally was. The sharp hum of tension that had filled the boardroom earlier that day still clung to Darnell's shoulders as he walked through the front door of his townhouse. But inside, the world softened. Warm lights, sizzling garlic, jazz playing low on the stereo. Here in this space he shared with Alex, the armor came off sometimes. Hey, you. Alex called from the kitchen without turning. You're late. You good? Darnell paused for a beat too long. Then he slipped off his coat, hung it neatly by the door, and walked into the kitchen like someone returning from a different battlefield. Alex glanced over a shoulder, sensing it. Tough day? Darnell shrugged. Tiring. Alex set down the spatula, wiped their hands on a towel, and turned fully to face him. Tiring or something else? Darnell hesitated. The smell of seasoned shrimp and roasted vegetables filled the room, but he felt no hunger. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen island and sat, elbows on the counter. Ellison called my proposal ambitious for someone like me. Right there in front of everyone. Alex didn't react immediately. They knew Darnell didn't exaggerate. If he said it that way, it had been exactly that. That's what he said, Alex asked gently. Darnell nodded. Verbatim. Silence settled like steam around them. Alex sat down across from him. And what did you say? Darnell let out a bitter half-laugh. Nothing. I kept the meeting going. I didn't even flinch, just moved to the Q&A. Alex studied him. Of course you did. The words weren't cruel, but they weren't soft either. I couldn't give them a reason to dismiss me, Darnell said, jaw tightening. You know how it is. One slip, one reaction, and I'm emotional or aggressive. I'm not just fighting bias, I'm fighting what they'll say I meant. Alex looked down for a moment, picking at the hem of a napkin. But what happens when the cost of that silence becomes you? Darnell stared at the granite countertop. The words sank in too fast. I didn't want to make it about me, he mumbled. Alex leaned forward. But it is about you. Every time they get to say things like that unchecked, they don't just keep their power, they keep your voice too. Darnell's hands curled into loose fists. It's death by 1,000 cuts. I don't even bleed anymore. I just carry it. The kitchen felt too quiet now. The jazz had faded into background. Even the pan on the stove had stopped hissing. I rehearse everything, he said, his voice low. Every line in my presentations, every comment in meetings. I triple-check how I sound, how I stand, how I breathe. And they still see someone who got lucky, someone who should be grateful. Alex reached across the island, their hand resting gently over his. Darnell, your silence protects them, not you. He met their eyes. For the first time all day, something cracked beneath his composed exterior. I'm tired, he admitted. Not of the work, of the pretending, of swallowing things I should be throwing back. Alex didn't look away, then stopped swallowing. It wasn't a command, it was an invitation. They finished dinner mostly in silence, the kind that says more than words. Darnell ate without tasting much, but the presence of Alex kept him tethered. Afterward, they moved to the living room, curled up on the couch, a documentary humming in the background. Halfway through, Darnell broke the quiet again. You ever wonder, he said slowly, if they'd still say that stuff if someone powerful was watching? Alex raised an eyebrow. Like who? Darnell hesitated. Then carefully, he mentioned the letter. The one from the White House. Alex sat upright. Wait, you never told me it was signed by him. I didn't want to turn it into a thing, Darnell replied. I was going to save it. Use it only if I had to. Alex stared at him, a mix of awe and disbelief. Babe, if this isn't the moment, what is? Darnell looked away. I wanted to win on my own. You already have, Alex said softly. But if your win doesn't change the game for anyone else, then what was the point? That question pierced deeper than Darnell expected. He sat there for a long time, watching shadows dance on the wall, the weight of all he hadn't said, pressing harder than ever. Maybe silence had been his shield. Maybe it had even helped him survive. But now it felt like a muzzle. And as Darnell lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, one thought took root and refused to leave. What would happen if for once, he didn't hold back? Darnell walked into the dimly lit office kitchen, well past usual hours, past convenience and into the territory where vulnerabilities leak. He was searching for coffee, but really he was searching for release. The other employees had gone, leaving behind hums of fluorescent lights and the distant buzz of cleaning crews. He poured himself a mug, the drip from the machine echoing in the quiet. He didn't expect anyone. He didn't want company. The warmth of the cup was a thin shield against the cold rage simmering within. Then he heard the chuckle. Low. Familiar. And of course Carter's just grateful to mop floors here, right? It was Richard Ellison's voice, easy, offhand, just loud enough. Darnell froze. The voice had followed him from the boardroom, sinking like a stone in his gut. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. A colleague, Logan, was there, stiff with morale pinned to appearances. Richard smirked and sipped his own coffee. Hey, Logan. Just reminding everyone what we do here. Logan shrugged, eyes flicking to the ground. He laughed nervously and walked away, but the words hung in the air like thick smoke. Darnell felt the mug drop, shattering porcelain, coffee splashing in slow motion across the floor tiles. The scent filled his nostrils, bitter, stinging, perfect fuel for what he knew was coming. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm out. He just stood there, coffee dripping from the cracked mug, watching them exit. Anger billowed inside. No, raged. Every slight catalogued, every stolen promotion, every impressive for a black guy, every time he'd smiled when he felt like screaming. He looked down at the coffee stain on the floor, a messy, dark reminder of how quickly things could break. Then Richard's voice came again, soft and mocking. "Everything okay, Carter?" That soft voice held an undertone. Pity, amusement, power. Darnell's hands shook. He opened his mouth. He could laugh it off. He could let it go, for now. But something loosened inside him. A valve. And the next moment, the wound that had been string-tied snapped.
"I'm not here to mop, Ellison." His voice cracked, low and raw. "I'm here because I earned the seat you're too blind to see."
Richard arched an eyebrow. Earning seats? Ambitious. It wasn't a joke. Not now. Darnell took another breath. "You think this is ambitious? You think I don't deserve what I've worked for?" Richard shook his head and leaned closer. "I didn't realize how sensitive you are when you're stepped on." The words landed like stones. Darnell's vision blurred. Anger tore open the tidy interior he spent years building. He stepped forward, voice rising. "Sensitive? Or human? Or done with this?" Richard chuckled, and Darnell saw his facade crack, just a flicker of real disdain. "Do you want HR involved? Because I can." Before the sentence finished, Darnell closed the distance, eyes blazing. He didn't touch Richard. He didn't need to. "Yes," Darnell said, chest heaving. "Do that. My conduct under provocation won't scare anyone, but I'm tired of standing in the hallway with the coffee while you stand in boardrooms measuring whose proposal is bold enough for someone like me." A silence followed. Richard paled. One after another. Co-workers emerged. Alex had arrived to find Darnell stunned, eyes wide, voice echoing. Others froze in hallways, phones out, curious. Richard stumbled backward, lips pressed together. "We'll see HR in the morning." Darnell let go. The mug dropped to the floor with a crash so loud it woke the entire office. As shards hit the tile, the moment shattered. He realized in that moment, he had exploded. Not physically, but emotionally, visibly. He saw Alex's concerned look. He saw colleagues' phones. He saw the weight of what he had done and what it meant. Security came shortly after. David from HR. They took statements. Richard sat huddled, silent. Darnell stood tall. Later, in a small conference room, HR director looked at him through burrowing eyes. "Mr. Carter, we received some reports of unprofessional conduct." Darnell's throat tightened. He'd done nothing but speak. But HR didn't ask about the words thrown at him. They wanted timelines, witness names. Did he feel threatened? Did he apologize? They weren't interested in context. He left the room, coffee-stained shirt still damp, mug broken in his silent grip. Alex met him at the elevator. "You okay?" they whispered. He didn't reply. He wondered, was his reputation unraveling faster than his mug? That night, messages pinged on his phone, clients checking in, co-workers reaching out in support, but none denied seeing or hearing. Darnell lay awake, replaying the exchange, the humiliation of being mocked in front of everyone, the stinging reality that his reaction, fully human, might cost him everything. He remembered Alex's words, "Your silence protects them, not you." He'd broken the silence, but what had he broken in return? Unexpected twist. The next morning, his inbox contained an email, but it wasn't from HR. It was from the president's office. One line in bold. "We've received your letter. Be ready." As Darnell stared at the message, two possibilities swirled. Had he reached a turning point, or unleashed the storm that would test everything he'd built? And as suitcases of evidence moved behind closed doors, he wondered, which would arrive first, vindication or ruin? The next morning, the hallways of Valoron Corporation buzzed, not with productivity, but with whispers. They didn't call Darnell's name. They didn't have to. His presence was enough to scatter conversations like a dropped glass. He walked through the office like a ghost still tied to the living, acknowledged in silence, avoided in eye contact. Even the way people looked at him had shifted. Not with disdain, but calculation. He was now a risk to be managed or a symbol to be observed. Nothing in between. He passed coworkers he'd known for years, shared birthdays, brainstorms, team offsites, and watched as they offered small, awkward smiles that vanished before they could be returned. Others made themselves busy. One woman, normally warm and chatty, tapped furiously on her keyboard and pretended not to see him. But not all turned away. Leah, a junior analyst he'd mentored, caught up with him near the elevators. She didn't speak right away, just walked beside him for a few seconds, lips pursed. "I saw it," she finally said. "I heard it too." Darnell paused. "You and 20 others. "Yeah, but I just wanted you to know I wasn't deaf or blind. You weren't wrong to say what you said." Her voice shook slightly. Darnell nodded, grateful. "Thank you." Leah bit her lip. "Just be careful. They don't like it when we speak too clearly." He gave a half smile, but her words sat with him. Even now, solidarity came laced with risk. Back at his desk, he noticed the new distance. No one said anything outright, but chairs were turned just a bit more away. Slack messages were fewer. Eye contact was down to a minimum. He wasn't an outsider now. He was visible. Later that afternoon, a scheduled meeting with HR appeared on his calendar. "Let's chat at 3. The note read. No subject, no context, just vague enough to feel like a warning. He arrived early, knowing that in these rooms preparation was currency. David from HR sat across from him, clipboard in hand. He smiled like someone doing inventory. Next to him was Amira, the firm's legal advisor. Her presence wasn't protocol, it was protection. But for whom? "Mr. Carter," David began too brightly. "We've gathered a few statements about yesterday." Darnell stayed silent. David continued. "Some witnesses expressed concern about your tone." "Tone," Darnell repeated, eyes narrowing. Amira shifted. They described it as elevated, disruptive. "I was mocked, publicly, twice." "We're not disputing that emotions were high," David said quickly. "We just want to ensure that workplace conduct is maintained." Darnell leaned forward. "Did you ask anyone about his tone?" They didn't answer. Instead, Amira adjusted her glasses. "Look, Darnell, this isn't an accusation. But when people see you respond the way you did, regardless of what was said, they focus on the reaction, not the trigger." Darnell exhaled slowly. "I know. That's the problem, isn't it?" Neither HR nor legal said anything. It was the same silence he'd heard in the boardroom. The same silence that had let Ellison's words echo, unchecked. David smiled again, this time thinner. "We're not taking formal action at this time." "That's good," Darnell said, "because I am." Their faces froze. "Excuse me?" He leaned forward, calm as stone. "This isn't just about yesterday. It's a pattern, a history of hostility, veiled discrimination, and willful ignorance. I'm filing a formal complaint." David opened his mouth, but Amira beat him to it. "Are you certain you want to go that route?" Darnell smiled, cold and precise. "Are you?" He walked out, and the silence followed him like smoke. By the next morning, the building had grown even quieter around him. The whispers didn't stop, they just became more efficient. Co-workers nodded politely, spoke only in professional terms. Even allies like Leah looked torn, anxious. His presence was radioactive now, impossible to ignore, but dangerous to stand too close to. But then, unexpectedly, he found a note on his desk. Folded, no name. "You weren't wrong. Most of us are just scared. Keep standing." There was no signature, just a scratch of hope left in anonymous ink. As Darnell turned the note over in his hands, a new question formed. Not whether HR would protect him, but whether anyone with real power would stand beside him when the next blow came. Because whispers were growing into winds, and something was coming. The day Darnell Carter filed the complaint, the air in the building felt colder, like something essential had shifted but no one would name it. He walked into the office of internal counsel with the weight of calculated risk sitting on his shoulders. Not fury, not revenge, something colder, a choice made from necessity, not emotion. He'd given the company every chance to do the right thing. Now he was holding them to it. The room was glass-walled, modern, minimalist, designed to make you feel watched and calm at the same time. Darnell sat down across from Stephanie Mays, the firm's internal legal counsel. She wore a neutral expression, one that had practiced more caution than conviction. "I've reviewed your summary," she said, sliding her reading glasses off. "I'm assuming you want to proceed with a formal harassment complaint against Mr. Ellison?" "I'm not assuming anything," Darnell replied. "I'm stating it." Stephanie blinked. Not a challenge, just surprise at the clarity. Most employees stammered, softened, second-guessed. Not Darnell, not today. He handed over the file, a thick compilation of emails, notes, summaries, and timelines. The record was surgical. He had documented each incident, from veiled comments to obvious exclusion, from praise that rang hollow to backhanded compliments that stung sharper than slurs. Stephanie leafed through the first few pages. "You've been compiling this for a while." Darnell met her eyes. "Because I knew this moment would come." She nodded slowly. "And you understand that this opens an official internal investigation."
I understand.
"We're obligated to notify Mr. Ellison and conduct interviews. It will be discreet, but—" She didn't finish. "But the whispers will start," Darnell said. "They already have." Stephanie didn't deny it. The meeting ended without fanfare. No applause, no dramatics, just a formal complaint sliding into the company's system, one more tick against the illusion of neutrality. Within hours, the effect rippled. By the time Darnell returned to his desk, the tone of the floor had changed. Not just the usual stiffness. This was different, calculated, quietly suspicious. People weren't just avoiding eye contact, they were watching him from the corners of their eyes, like something about him had become radioactive. Even his supervisor, Mallory, a woman who once championed his rise, offered only a brief nod in the hallway. Then the email hit. A company-wide notice from HR. An internal review is being conducted in response to recent workplace concerns. We encourage staff to remain professional and cooperative. This is a confidential matter. They didn't name names, but they didn't need to. The timing said everything. The next morning, Ellison arrived exactly on time. Darnell was already at his desk, reading analytics. Calm on the surface, but every nerve in his body sharpened. Ellison walked by, stopped. "Morning, Carter," he said casually, like they were discussing weather. Darnell looked up, stone-faced. Ellison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Heard something's going on. Surprised to hear my name involved." Darnell said nothing. Ellison leaned a little closer, voice just above a whisper. "I've been in this company a long time. These things, they blow over." He straightened his tie and walked off. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning dressed as experience. And for the first time since filing the complaint, doubt crept in. Not about what he'd done, but about how the system would respond. The investigation began the next week. Interviews. Meetings. Check-ins. Some done quietly, others leaked within hours. Leah stopped replying to his texts. A junior manager he mentored requested a transfer, no explanation. And then came the phrase that spread like smoke through hallways, Slack threads and after-hours drinks, too sensitive. He's too sensitive. He probably misread the room. It was a joke. Ellison jokes like that with everyone. A narrative began to grow, invisible but pervasive, that Darnell had misunderstood, that he couldn't take a joke, that this was more about ego than equity. It was the oldest weapon of all, doubt. Worse still was the professionalism of it all. No one called him names. No one raised voices. They just rerouted. Cold civility instead of confrontation. Polite silence instead of support. Even Stephanie, during their second check-in, said these things take time. It's important we stay balanced. Balanced. As if Darnell's years of quiet humiliation were equal to Ellison's laughter. Still, he pressed forward. He supplied more records. Emails where he was excluded from key meetings. Times he was asked to take notes while others pitched ideas he'd developed. Comments about his background. About being street smart. About being exceptional for a Detroit kid. He stacked them into a timeline that told the truth in sharp, inarguable lines. But the company moved slower. Too slow. Then came the rumor. Someone claimed Darnell had fabricated parts of the complaint. No one named their source. It came in fragments. That's what I heard. They said he exaggerated. Legal's looking into it. Darnell went to Stephanie. "I want to know where that's coming from." She held up her hands. "It's unofficial. Nothing we can verify. These things have a life of their own." "You mean someone's giving it life?" Stephanie looked tired. "Darnell, I'm not here to protect you. I'm here to protect the process." "And who protects me?" Silence. She didn't have an answer. That night, Darnell didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, laptop glowing. His phone vibrated with news alerts, personal emails, calendar reminders, but he ignored them. He pulled out the letter, the one from the president's office. He read it again, slowly. It outlined federal standards for workplace inclusion under the administration's new executive order. It listed penalties for organizations that failed to act on documented systemic bias. It invited collaboration for corporate reform. And it had his name, Darnell Carter. The letter wasn't just support. It was leverage. But he had waited. Why? To win fairly? To keep his dignity? To let the company prove it wasn't like the rest? Now he realized that patience had only emboldened the system. Unexpected twist. Just before midnight, an anonymous email dropped into his inbox. Subject line, watch your back. Attached a screen grab of a group chat private internal, senior level. He recognized the names. Directors. Legal. Ellison. The messages were short. He's trying to take us down. What's his end game? Let's keep this contained. Push for early exit. Severance and silence. No signature. No context. But it was real. And it was war. As Darnell stared at the thread, the question was no longer about justice. It was about survival. Would the truth be enough, when the people in power had already begun rewriting the story? The call came just after 10 a.m., quiet, unannounced, and carrying a weight that didn't match the politeness of the voice. Mr. Carter? This is Janice from the CEO's office. Ms. Winford would like a word. Now if you're available. Darnell didn't hesitate. Of course. But his pulse quickened. The CEO rarely summoned anyone directly. Most interactions happened through layers of hierarchy and agenda. But not today. Not after his formal complaint. Not after the anonymous screenshots. As he stepped onto the executive floor, everything about the space felt intentional. Sleek, hushed, powerful. Even the air felt different, as though filtered for the people who never had to raise their voice to be heard. Janice met him with a smile so practiced it felt mechanical. Right this way. She led him to a glass office that overlooked the city, where Meredith Winford, CEO of Valoron Corporation, sat behind a walnut desk, reviewing something on her tablet. She didn't look up at first, just gestured for him to sit. Mr. Carter, she said finally, glancing over rimless glasses. Thank you for coming up. Darnell sat, steady. Of course. I've been following the matter, she began. And I want to start by saying we appreciate your contributions here. You're a valued part of this company. The compliment felt rehearsed, like a sedative before surgery. But, she continued, we're at a delicate moment. Darnell said nothing. Let her speak. Morale is fragile. People are talking. Not just about your complaint, but about division, fear. There's a sense that we're, how shall I say, fracturing. She leaned forward slightly. And when an organization fractures, people stop focusing on the work. Productivity slips. Teams lose cohesion. Trust erodes. Darnell stared at her. And you think that's because I filed a complaint? I think, she said carefully, that perception becomes reality very quickly in environments like ours. He felt the words before she finished them. Perception, optics, harmony, the company lexicon of avoidance. I want to be clear, she added. We take your concerns seriously, but we also need to think about the bigger picture, the long-term health of this company. Darnell leaned back. So what are you suggesting? She didn't blink. I'm asking you to consider retracting your complaint. We'll document it as resolved through internal conversation. You'll receive a commendation, perhaps a shift in role, something more aligned with your strategic vision. And in turn, we'll move forward, together. He laughed, dry and low. So I take the fall for the sake of the company? No one's falling, she said quickly. We're offering you elevation without the noise. The noise, he repeated, tasting the word. Meredith's tone softened. Look, Darnell, you're talented, respected. But this fight turns you into something else. You become a symbol. And symbols are polarizing. Sometimes the best leaders know when to hold back for the greater good. Darnell locked eyes with her. I didn't come here to be a symbol, he said. I came here to build. Then help us do that, she said, without tearing the walls down to make your point. His breath caught. It wasn't a threat. It was a negotiation. One built on the assumption that his pain, his dignity, was a variable in a larger equation, an expendable part of the company's image. He stood slowly. I've given this company years of excellence. I've taken the hits, swallowed the microaggressions, played the game, and now that I've stepped out of line, now you want harmony. She didn't respond. He continued, voice steady but sharp. What you're asking me to do isn't compromise. It's surrender. You're asking me to validate silence, to protect the man who mocked me, to tell the people watching that truth costs too much. Still no response. Darnell stepped toward the door. I won't do that. But then an unexpected shift. Meredith exhaled, long and slow. I thought you'd say that. He turned, surprised. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a folder, thick, unmarked. Ellison's file, she said. Unofficial, but not unfounded. You're not the first. You're just the first to fight loud enough. Darnell's heart raced. You've known? I've heard things, but no one ever followed through. No one ever pushed. He stepped forward. So what now? She closed the folder. Now we watch. I want to see where this goes. But if you're planning to escalate publicly, I need to know what's coming. Darnell nodded slowly. I'm not the only one watching. As he walked out, folder unopened, a chilling thought struck him. If the CEO knows the truth and still plays chess with it, how far would she let the board collapse to protect the king? By the end of the week, Darnell Carter felt like a man split in two. One half still navigating the sterile corridors of Valeron Corporation, the other searching for oxygen where the ceilings weren't made of glass. He found it in a place far from boardrooms, stock options, and optics. Every Saturday morning, tucked behind a modest community center in East Detroit, he led a mentorship program for black boys ages 13 to 18. No one there knew about the letter from the president, or the CEO's folder, or the quiet war brewing behind Valeron's chrome glass windows.
They just knew Mr. Darnell showed up. Every week, without fail.
That morning, he walked in carrying boxes of notebooks and granola bars. The room erupted with familiar energy. Boys shouting over each other. Sneakers squeaking on tiled floors. Laughter breaking across the walls like thunder. He exhaled. Here, he wasn't too sensitive. He wasn't ambitious for someone like him. He was necessary. All right, listen up, he called, voice rising over the noise. Today we're talking goals and what it means to set your own instead of inheriting someone else's version of success. One boy, Jaden, 16, sharp-witted, angry in the way boys get when the world lies to them too often, raised his hand.
What's the point, Mr. Darnell? Like for real. You bust your ass, they still see you the same.
The room went quiet. Darnell looked at him for a moment. Then he pulled up a chair. You're right, he said. You could build something beautiful and still have someone call it lucky. But the point isn't what they see. He tapped his chest. It's what you won't forget about yourself. The words didn't land with thunder. They settled like roots. After the session, Jaden lingered. You really think things can change? Darnell smiled, tired but honest. They already are. You're standing here, asking that question out loud. That's change. Outside, the wind bit at his face. His car sat across the lot, quiet, humming in the cold, but Darnell didn't move. He looked at the building, at the kids pouring out with backpacks and inside jokes, at the murals on the wall, portraits of black leaders painted with vibrant, defiant color. Real power wasn't waiting for someone to open a door. It was handing the key to someone else. Inside Valeron, he was fighting for a seat at a table. Here he was building tables from scratch. Later that evening, Alex noticed the difference in him. They sat on the couch, a movie playing in the background, untouched. You look lighter, Alex said. I think I remembered who I was before all this, Darnell replied. Alex turned to him, eyes searching. Before the complaint? Before the company, he said. Before the meetings, before the masks. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Alex leaned in, and now? Now I know the fight's bigger than me, he said. But also, it needs people who still feel something, who still care. Alex reached for his hand. So you're not backing down? Darnell shook his head. Nope, I'm just backing out for a breath, for perspective. Because sometimes survival looked like pushing forward. But other times it looked like remembering why you started. As his phone lit up with a calendar alert, Executive Council Emergency Session, Monday 9 a.m. Darnell stared at the screen, jaw set. Purpose had given him clarity. But could it stand against a boardroom ready to tear him apart from the inside out? Monday morning arrived like a storm on mute. The executive floor, usually humming with quiet authority, felt more like a courtroom than a workplace. Darnell stepped off the elevator with his shoulders squared and breath steady. He had survived worse. He had prepared for this. But nothing had prepared him for what was waiting. An envelope. It sat on his desk. No return address, no signature. Just one line on the outside, confidential HR. He opened it slowly. Inside, a printed email, anonymous, alleging inappropriate conduct toward a junior employee. Vague language, no date, no name, just the heavy suggestion of impropriety. His chest tightened. A knock followed seconds later. 2 HR reps, David and a second face he didn't recognize, stood in his doorway. Mr. Carter, David said, we need to speak, now. They didn't wait for his consent. They led him down the hallway like a man being escorted from a crime scene, not a conference room. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence. The whispers, once scattered, now formed a visible current around him. In the HR suite, the questions came quickly. Do you recognize this complaint? Have you ever had personal contact outside of work with this person? Would you classify your interactions with junior staff as informal or professional in tone? Darnell stared at them. There's no name. There's no accusation. There's no claim. It's an anonymous smear. David glanced at the paper again. We have to follow protocol. Protocol? Darnell snapped, voice still low but edged. Where was protocol when I was mocked in front of the board? When my pitches were dismissed by people who repeated them later? When I documented discrimination and it sat in silence? No answer. The new HR officer, a woman with her hair twisted tightly back, and a polished smile that didn't reach her eyes, interjected. These are separate issues. We're taking both seriously. He could feel the walls shift around him. This wasn't about misconduct. This was about removing a problem. He was the problem now. By noon, his company login was locked, access to internal files restricted, calendar wiped clean. Darnell stood at his desk, numb, watching the blue lock icon blink on his monitor. One coworker paused by his cubicle and quickly kept walking. Another didn't look up at all. His badge still opened doors for now. But the world inside those doors had already decided what he was. Guilty by disruption. Alex met him outside for lunch. They sat on a stone bench near the reflecting pool behind the building. The same bench where Darnell once signed his promotion letter. He told them everything. The letter, the lockouts, the silence. Alex didn't ask if he was okay. They knew better. Instead, they reached into their coat and handed him something, his own portfolio, the one he usually left at home. Inside, the letter from the president, the documentation from his complaint, the screenshots of the executive chat. You might need to hold this tighter now, Alex said softly. Darnell nodded. I didn't even see it coming. That's the thing, they replied. Retaliation doesn't knock. It slips in and pretends to be the house you built. That afternoon, a scheduled one-on-one with the general counsel vanished from his calendar. His weekly analytics report was reassigned. The new intern he'd recruited months earlier didn't show up for their check-in. Still no official email, no explanation, just distance, cold and deliberate. Then around 4 p.m. he received a call from his bank. Mr. Carter, this is a routine check. We noticed an unusual freeze on one of your corporate accounts. We're just confirming. Darnell froze. They froze my card? Yes, sir. The issuer flagged it from your employer, temporarily suspended due to internal inquiry. His personal account was fine. His corporate card, used for official travel and department expenses, was not. A new reality settled in. They weren't investigating misconduct. They were dismantling his credibility, inch by inch, quietly enough that no single act looked suspicious on its own. Darnell sat alone in his office, long after most had left, staring at the window reflection of a man who once believed he could outwork injustice. Now he wondered if justice had ever been part of the equation. Then a message popped up on his screen. Private, untraceable, from a restricted email address. Just 3 lines. We warned you. The higher you climb, the harder they pull. Walk away while you can. No one will believe you now. He didn't flinch. He didn't reply. But his silence was no longer surrender. It was strategy. Unexpected twist. The next morning, a former intern, Danica, called him. Her voice shook. Mr. Carter, she said, I think I know who filed that complaint. Darnell gripped the phone tighter. It wasn't real, she whispered. I overheard them saying it was just enough to trigger protocol. They said you'd fold.
Who said that?
She paused. You won't believe it, but it came from legal, and Ellison was in the room. Darnell ended the call with a numbness he hadn't felt in years. Not because he was shocked, but because he wasn't. If the system could manufacture guilt to silence truth, how deep did the rot go? And who else was in on it? The building felt heavier the next day, like it had absorbed every whispered rumor and weaponized it. Darnell walked through the corridors not as an employee, but as a question mark, frozen account, suspended meetings, eyes that looked past him, then whispered behind closed doors. He wasn't paranoid. He was being erased. But amid the orchestrated silence, a voice emerged. Quiet, unexpected, precise. Miriam Blackwell, Senior Executive Vice President of Global Markets, white in her 60s, known for her brutal honesty, meticulous strategy, and the glass ceiling she'd shattered in heels sharp enough to draw blood. She stopped Darnell in the stairwell, of all places. Carter, she said plainly, walk with me. He hesitated, then followed. They didn't speak until they reached the 5th floor patio, rarely used, slightly weather-worn, A place for mid-level management to take calls when they needed privacy. Miriam leaned on the railing, arms crossed. Her voice was low but direct. I heard what they're saying. Darnell's eyes narrowed. You mean the anonymous complaint? She shook her head. I mean the script. That caught him off guard. They're not reacting, she continued. They're executing, piece by piece, just enough to make you doubt your own record. Classic containment strategy. Darnell studied her, unsure of her angle. Why are you telling me this? Miriam looked out across the city. Because I watched them do it before. Different decade, different excuse, same blueprint. He didn't speak, but she could see the mix of anger and disbelief tightening behind his eyes. I was the only woman in my division for 12 years, she said. I smiled through inappropriate jokes, was told I was fiery for stating facts, passed over for men I trained, and when I finally said something, they said I was overreacting. Sound familiar? He nodded slowly. I watched how they erased us, she added. Not all at once, but incrementally, until we second-guessed whether we'd even been right to speak. Darnell leaned back. They froze my accounts, locked me out of my own projects. HR's silent, legal's dirty, and now they've got some ghost complaint hanging over me like a guillotine. Miriam turned to him. I believe you, and I've started digging. That stunned him. Digging? She nodded. Back channels, internal logs, communications they thought were deleted. I don't move without receipts. You're risking a lot, Darnell said quietly. No, she replied, they are, because if they think they can get away with dismantling someone like you without leaving footprints, they've forgotten what I've survived. She handed him a flash drive. Start here, she said. Internal Slack messages, group chats, meeting summaries where your name was scrubbed, even a few casual jokes you were never copied on. He stared at it. A small piece of plastic that might contain proof, vindication, or the last string holding him together. Why now? He asked. Why me? Miriam exhaled. Because I've seen men like Ellison rot entire floors of this company and walk away untouched. Because no one ever backed me when it was my turn. And because you didn't fold. Darnell looked down at the drive. Will it be enough? Miriam didn't answer immediately. Then she turned and fixed her gaze on him. That depends. Are you willing to go where this leads? He didn't answer. But in his silence, something shifted. Not surrender. Not fear. Resolve. Because now, for the first time, he had more than a voice. He had evidence. And an ally standing where no one expected. The following evening, Darnell Carter sat at his kitchen table, with the lights low, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. The flash drive Miriam had handed him sat untouched for hours, like a live wire daring him to connect it. Alex stood across the room, watching the quiet war play out inside him. You don't have to look at it tonight, they said gently. Darnell didn't respond. He finally slid the flash drive into his laptop and opened the folder. And the floor began to fall away. The first file, a Slack transcript. A private chat labeled exec-sync. The tone was casual, the language, coded. Ellison, Carter's growing teeth. Time to file them down. Director WL. You mean performance manage? Lol. HR Baker. He's too calculated to fire. But if he cracks, Ellison, then we help him break. Darnell's hands trembled slightly. Not with rage, but something colder. Recognition. He'd always felt the trap being built beneath him. Now he could see its blueprint. File after file revealed more. Meeting notes that omitted his name from projects he initiated. Performance reviews subtly altered, replacing leader with independent. Assertive with needs alignment. Emails between Ellison and HR with phrases like narrative shaping and optics. And worst of all, the false complaint. Planned in a message from legal? Legal CM. Drafting an anonymous HR nudge. Should be enough to trigger internal audit. He'll have to defend shadows. He scrolled back up, searching the timestamp. It was 3 days before the complaint arrived. 3 days before the freeze. 3 days before he almost gave up. Alex walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder. This is it, Darnell whispered. It's all here. Alex leaned in closer. They didn't just come for you. They engineered the fall. Darnell leaned back in the chair, heart pounding in his ears. Miriam's voice echoed in his mind. I've started digging. She had done more than dig. She had unearthed an entire architecture of sabotage. Later that night, an encrypted folder unlocked. One Darnell hadn't seen before. It was labeled HR Leak 2310. Inside, internal memos. Some marked confidential. Others labeled draft only, all routed through HR. Some came from David, others from a higher clearance. They detailed a strategy to minimize exposure from internal grievance escalation. Phrases like deprioritize Carter's inquiry and leverage ambiguity of intent peppered the documents like stains. He forwarded the entire folder to his personal cloud. Then he printed the most damning pieces, hard evidence, physical copies. He knew digital could be buried. The next morning he walked into Valoron different. He didn't hide anymore. Let them watch. Let them guess how much he knew. Miriam met him in the lobby with a single nod. You saw it? All of it. She glanced at the envelope in his hand. You ready for the next move? No. He paused. But I'm done waiting for someone else to make it. By noon, a storm was building in the higher floors. The documents had begun circulating, quietly at first. Miriam had dropped one file anonymously to legal, another to HR, a third to the board's private Slack channel. And it spread like fire in dry brush. HR called a meeting. Legal followed suit. By 3 p.m., Ellison was summoned. His face pale, his swagger gone. He didn't look at Darnell when he passed him in the hallway. And that's when the real fear set in. Not in Darnell, but in the others. Because for the first time, the silence broke. Whispers turned into sharp stares. Executives whispered names behind closed doors. Darnell's not in suspicion, but in warning. He has documents. From inside. Real evidence. Miriam entered a board prep meeting that afternoon and slid a single-page summary to every member present. It read, Summary, evidence of systemic suppression, coordinated retaliation, and misconduct. Primary targets, Carter, Blackwell. Involved, HR, legal, EVP Ellison. Supporting files, attached. Recommendation, emergency ethics review. Darnell stayed quiet. Let the paper speak now. But with exposure came new danger. That evening, his office was accessed after hours. A custodian he trusted tipped him off. Said someone from IT had been seen near his desk, no badge displayed. The next day, his email was wiped. Calendar, empty. Phone disconnected. An internal admin told him softly, they're trying to force you out without saying the word. Later, an HR assistant he barely knew passed him a note. Get everything off the company server, now. He did. By midnight, his flash drive was backed by 2 encrypted drives, one in Alex's possession, the other with Miriam. Then came the final twist. A package arrived at his home. No return address. Inside, a printed copy of the Slack logs. At the bottom, a handwritten note in red ink. You think this helps you, but it won't save you. It wasn't signed. Darnell stared at it for a long time, then calmly shredded the envelope, but not the pages. He added them to the evidence. Because now, the question wasn't if the evidence was real. It was whether the people at the top had the courage or the ethics to act on it. As Darnell prepared for the emergency ethics hearing scheduled for the next morning, a final thought echoed through his mind like a warning bell. The truth was no longer hidden. But would it be enough when power had everything to lose? Darnell Carter had seen letters, promotion letters, denial letters, apologies thinly veiled as HR statements, but nothing prepared him for the letter that arrived on the morning of the ethics hearing. It came in a matte black envelope, marked with an official U.S. government seal. Hand-delivered, no fanfare. Inside it wasn't just a letter. It was a reckoning. Printed on thick, watermarked paper, the letter carried the masthead of the Presidential Office of Equity and Corporate Accountability, an agency formed under the current administration's Executive Initiative on Systemic Discrimination. The salutation was formal, but the intent was not. Mr. Carter, we have received credible documentation concerning internal practices at Valoron Corporation. Your engagement in our nationwide equity pilot program has not gone unnoticed. As per Executive Directive EO 926B, companies found to engage in willful retaliation or racialized suppression may face suspension of federal contracts, class action investigations, and referral to civil oversight commissions. We encourage you to remain vigilant and protected. Your participation holds weight. Respectfully, Elena Moraine, Office of the President, countersigned, the President of the United States. At the bottom, the signature wasn't just symbolic, it was fire. The President's name, clear and undeniable. Alex stood beside Darnell in the kitchen, reading over his shoulder. This is real? They whispered. Darnell nodded slowly. This is war. But this time, on my terms. He sat down, reading the letter again. Every line pulsed with consequence. This wasn't support. This was ammunition. A clause deep in the second paragraph outlined something even more important. Upon delivery of this memorandum, the recipient is empowered to initiate direct disclosure proceedings with federal oversight personnel. Should you encounter obstruction, please notify our liaison office immediately. In plain terms, if Valoron blocked his access, he could bypass them completely, and the government would have his back. Darnell looked across the room at the folder from Miriam, at the flash drives, at the torn pieces of what they'd tried to do to him. For the first time, he didn't feel cornered. He felt armed. Across the city, in Valoron's glass-walled tower, the executive team sat in tense preparation. The ethics hearing wasn't just about HR protocol anymore, it was about containment. And they knew Darnell had something. What they didn't know was that what he had now didn't need their approval to matter. Before leaving for the hearing, Darnell did something unexpected. He emailed a copy of the letter scanned, secured, encrypted to the board chair's private account. Not HR, not legal, not PR. Just the man whose signature sat above every one of Ellison's promotions. Along with it, he sent a subject line that said everything. "You have 1 hour before I make this public." Then he shut his laptop and left. The hearing took place in a secured conference room on the 21st floor. Glass doors, one-way privacy film, bottled water untouched at each seat. The chairs were filled with board members, compliance officers, legal reps, and at the end of the table, Ellison, stone-faced and freshly cornered. Darnell entered last. He carried no briefcase, just the letter. Miriam followed 2 steps behind, her own folder in hand, silent, solid. The chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, we've received information." Rather suddenly. "You've had the information," Darnell said, calmly placing the letter in the center of the table. "You just didn't think I'd survive long enough to bring it to you." The room shifted. One of the board members leaned forward, reading. His face changed.
"This is from the president?"
Darnell didn't respond. He didn't have to. Miriam added, "If the board is interested in confirming its authenticity, I'd be happy to place a call right now. We've already been in contact." Ellison stood, trying to recover control.
"This is grandstanding. We followed every internal procedure. HR has been diligent."
"HR has been complicit," Miriam interrupted. She opened her folder. Inside, timestamps, message logs, altered performance reviews, all color-coded. Another board member, visibly shaken, whispered, "You coordinated a complaint?" Miriam's tone was ice. "They manufactured one, and they built the fallout months in advance." The room exploded into layered murmurs. Darnell sat still, the center of a storm he no longer feared. One legal officer stood. "We need to pause this. Internal review protocol." "You pause this," Miriam said, "and we send every one of these documents to federal compliance and media outlets within the hour. Let's not forget the White House is watching." The silence that followed wasn't just discomfort, it was collapse. The chair turned to Ellison. "Is any of this true?" Ellison didn't answer. He just sat down, deflated. And for the first time, Darnell saw fear on his face, not the fear of being exposed, but of being outmaneuvered. After the hearing, Darnell stepped outside into the light of an early spring afternoon. The air felt different, not freer, but clearer. Alex was waiting. "Did it work?" "I didn't burn the place down," he said, "but I lit the match." They didn't smile, they just stood with him. Still, close. Because this wasn't a victory lap. It was a turning point. That night, as Darnell sat alone, the news broke.
Major tech firm under federal scrutiny for racial retaliation claims. Whistleblower identified.
And his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. A voice on the other end. "Mr. Carter, this is Elena Moran. The president would like to meet." It was Darnell who called the meeting.
Not legal.
Not HR. Not the board chair. It was Darnell Carter. Black, bruised by the system, but standing tall with a letter signed by the president and a dossier of proof no longer buried beneath protocol. The subject line of his invitation read simply, "Transparency session, 9 a.m., main boardroom. Attendance required." The RSVPs came in within minutes, because now they weren't just attending a meeting. They were stepping into a moment that could define the future of Valoron, or destroy it. The morning air in the lobby was unusually still. Even the security guards stood a little straighter. Whispers filled the elevators, and eyes tracked him without subtlety. He wore a dark tailored suit, no tie, crisp, controlled, his version of armor. Miriam met him at the boardroom door. "They're all in there." "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 30 years, she said. "Let's make them wish they'd listened sooner." Inside, The room buzzed with low-level tension. Chairs filled with high-stakes names: legal, HR, board members, operations leads, and at the far end, Ellison. Still smug. Still pretending this was a formality. Until Darnell placed the envelope on the table. "This is not a performance," Darnell began, voice low but firm. "It's a reckoning." No one moved. He clicked the remote. The first slide appeared, an email dated 6 months ago, titled Containment Strategy. Then another Slack messages, including the one that read, "He's growing teeth. Time to file them down." The gasps weren't loud, but they were real. He moved through the slides with surgical precision, one by one revealing the chain of manipulation. How his reviews were altered, how the false complaint was plotted, how retaliation wasn't reactive, it was strategic. Miriam handed physical copies down the row. The weight of paper mirrored the weight of truth. Then Darnell placed the final piece on the table. The letter. The president's letter. "This letter doesn't request action," Darnell said. "It requires it. You may have power in this room, but the moment you condone systemic targeting of an employee under federal protection, you no longer control the narrative. You become the story." Eyes darted. Chairs shifted. Some board members scanned the letter, their faces blanching with each line. Ellison finally spoke. "This is a stunt," he said, trying for poise. "It's one perspective, edited fragments, taken out of context." Miriam cut in sharply. "Are you saying the messages weren't sent from your account?" Ellison hesitated. Well, yes, but it was banter. Team venting. You're making it political." One board member, an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharp memory, looked up. "You suggested orchestrating a false misconduct report. That's not politics, that's criminal liability." The room turned colder. Another board member leaned forward. "What else haven't we seen?" Darnell met that gaze directly. Enough to show this company doesn't just tolerate bias, it funds it. Ellison stood now, voice rising. "This is insubordination. I've built half the strategies you praised today, and you let him walk in and twist a few Slack messages into a federal crisis." Miriam stood too. "This isn't about strategies. It's about what kind of company you are when no one's looking." The boardroom fell silent. Someone coughed. Another reached for water. They didn't drink. Then, the board chair, silent until now, closed the folder in front of him. "Darnell," he said carefully, "what outcome are you seeking?" Darnell didn't hesitate. Accountability, transparency, and Ellison's termination. Ellison sputtered. "You can't be serious." The chair raised a hand. "We've reviewed the documentation. This meeting was about hearing it out loud, and now we have." A pause. Then another voice, this time from legal. "If we don't act, we risk breach of federal equity compliance, loss of federal funding, and exposure to civil suits." HR chimed in quietly. "And employee unrest, internal morale." Still, some board members looked uncertain. Fear behind their eyes, not of Darnell, but of the precedent this would set. It was then Miriam stepped forward. "If this room can't find the courage to do what's right, I'll walk, and so will every silent employee watching this unfold." Darnell added, "This isn't just about me. It's about the next person, the next black employee you ask to smile through erasure." A full minute passed in silence. Then the board chair stood. "We'll go into recess. We will reconvene at noon for a final decision." As Darnell walked out of the room, one final thought echoed louder than the rest. Had he turned the tide, or just given them one more reason to bury the truth deeper than before? When the board reconvened at noon, no one made eye contact. Not with Ellison, not with each other, especially not with Darnell Carter. The earlier storm had passed, but in its place hung something heavier: consequence. Ellison walked in first, posture stiff, expression tight. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't composure, it was calculation. He believed still in some deep corporate part of himself that the company wouldn't dare. Darnell entered last. He didn't speak either, until the board chair cleared his throat and stood. "We've reviewed the documentation. Legal has confirmed authenticity. External counsel has been consulted." He paused, the weight of the next sentence visibly slowing his tongue. "As of today, the board has voted unanimously to terminate Richard Ellison, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, for cause, effective immediately." The room exhaled. Ellison didn't move at first. Then, "You're out of your minds," he muttered. "I built half the revenue models you're still using." The chair didn't flinch. "You also built a system of intimidation, retaliation, and race-based gatekeeping." Ellison turned to Darnell. His eyes narrowed. "This is your victory lap?" Darnell didn't respond with rage. Instead, he stepped forward and quietly set a sealed envelope in front of Ellison. It bore the White House seal. "This," he said calmly, "is the federal acknowledgement of your misconduct. It will remain in your file. It is irreversible. Signed by the president." Ellison's jaw clenched. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. Security entered seconds later. No one called them. They were scheduled. He was already expected. As they approached, Ellison turned to the board. "You'll regret this." One board member, previously silent, said flatly, "We already do. We just regret it took this long." Ellison was led out. No applause. No final word. Just the soft hush of institutional shame. As the door clicked shut, whispers began to ripple. One assistant murmured, "Did you see the letter?" Another, "Federal intervention. That's never happened before." Someone else, "We've got to revisit policy. This can't happen again." But Darnell didn't stay for the fallout. He gathered his folder, his flash drive, and Miriam, who stood beside him with a small nod. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "We started it." The elevator ride down was silent, tense but not heavy. It felt like something shifting underground. Fault lines cracking, but not yet breaking apart. Down in the lobby, employees watched him. This time not with avoidance, but with something closer to reverence. He nodded once to Leah, who was standing frozen near reception. She nodded back, her eyes brimming with something wordless. Outside, the day had turned warm. Bright even. He loosened his collar and turned his phone off. He wasn't going back in. Not today. Maybe not ever. 2 hours later, he arrived at the community center. Same building, same chipped bricks, same kids who didn't yet know how close they were to a world that tried to erase men like him. He walked into the main room, where Jaden was waiting. "You're late," the teen said. Darnell smiled. "Got caught up in something." Jaden eyed him. "You good?" Darnell nodded. "Yeah, something ended today." The boy raised a brow. "That a good thing or bad thing?" Darnell thought about it for a moment. "It's the beginning of something better." He pulled a chair into the circle. Around him were kids hungry for direction, for truth, for someone who'd lived the story and survived it. "I've got a new assignment," he said to the room. "Starting today, we're building something. Not for resumes, not for points, for impact." Jaden leaned in. "What kind of something?" Darnell's voice was steady, charged. "A program, to train you, not just in business, but in how to read the systems you're going to walk into, and how to outthink them without becoming them." The room went quiet. A new kind of silence. Respect. Recognition. The kind Darnell had waited his whole career to feel. Outside, the sun dipped slightly, casting long shadows. Darnell stepped out for air. He wasn't tired. He was ready. He reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a note, one he hadn't shown anyone yet. It had arrived 2 days ago, unannounced. From Elena Morane. "We'd like you to consider consulting on the Federal Equity and Compliance Initiative. Your experience, visibility, and courage could shape policy for decades. Think about it. We already are." At the bottom, another signature. The president. He folded it back, tucked it away. It wasn't a dream anymore. It was a path. Darnell walking away from the Valoron building. Not with resignation, but release. Toward the mentorship center. Toward a boy asking questions no one used to answer. Toward a policy table once guarded by the very voices he silenced today. As Darnell steps into his next meeting with federal staffers waiting across the table, one question looms. Now that he has the power, how will he use it for others like him still trapped inside? If this story moved you, if Darnell's journey made you feel something you couldn't put into words, then don't let it stop here. We tell stories that uncover truth, that challenge silence, that amplify voices too often ignored. And if you believe those stories matter, then be part of this movement. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that subscribe button, not just to support a channel, but to stand with every voice still fighting to be heard.